So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the course, The Buddhist Path of Awakening. We are working our way through the three yanas, the three vehicles of Tibetan Buddhism, as taught by Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Over a course of 15 years, he took his students away every year for 3 months to what was called Vajradhatu Seminary. And he gave teachings on the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, or as he preferred to call it, the foundational vehicle, the Mahayana, the greater vehicle, and the Vajrayana, or the adamantine or indestructible vehicle. These teachings that he gave were digested, along with a few other things I'm learning, into 3 volumes called The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And these 3 volumes are the Hinayana volume, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. We are on the Mahayana volume. We're on chapter 22, and we're dealing with the subject of emptiness, Shunyata, which is key to the Mahayana. So tonight we're going to lead off with Michael. And Michael, would you like to take it away?
Welcome, everyone. So this is a fascinating and challenging chapter. The title is Experiencing Reality in its Fullest Sense. And it doesn't take much meditation practice to realize that much of the time that's not our experience, that we don't experience reality in its fullest sense. And before launching into the chapter, I wanted to just share a snippet of a conversation I had with a meditation instructor some 40 years ago. And what she was telling me is that she'd had a conversation with Trungpa Rinpoche in which he asked her, "What can you say about reality?" So of course she was totally flummoxed and kind of floundered around. And finally he just said, "Reality is vivid. It's vivid." And so keep that in mind as we go through this chapter. So the first section of the chapter is titled The Groundlessness of Absolute Truth. And absolute truth is one of 2 or 3 different translations that he gives for tundam, meaning superior, ultimate, or absolute truth. And he says that it's the real truth as opposed to the relative truth, which is what we talked about a great deal the last couple of weeks. And it's quite difficult to explain. So if it's hard for him to explain, needless to say, I'll do my best. But still, this is a challenging chapter. He says one of the definitions of tundam is that it's experiencing reality in its fullest sense, again, the title of the chapter, without regarding any individual style as tangible from an ego-clinging point of view. So we're talking about an experience of totally letting go of any kind of concept, reference point, or fixed point of view or preconception, so that we are totally available to experiencing reality in its fullest sense. In going further in his teaching, Trungpa Rinpoche says he's going to drop the Yogacara viewpoint that we talked about last week to talk about relative truth and kunzup, and instead approach it from the point of view of the Madhyamikans. As he says, the Yogacara viewpoint is very helpful with understanding relative truth, but to develop an understanding or more importantly, an experience of ultimate truth, the Madhyamaka approach is the way to go. He says the absolute truth is that we have no truth. And then he says that he doesn't want to discuss theories about absolute truth, but rather build up some kind of ground for experiencing the groundlessness of absolute truth. Because just knowing absolute truth does not help you. The question is, how do you know it's absolute truth? So with that, the chapter goes on to begin doing exactly that, building the ground, some kind of ground for experiencing the groundlessness of absolute truth. And in the next section, which is titled Shunyata and Buddha Nature, he begins by saying the nature of Shunyata, or emptiness, is being able to see the phenomenal world in the absence of dualistic fixation. So again, in talking about dualistic fixation, we're again being reminded of what we talked about 2-3 weeks back about the nature of twofold ego, where with twofold ego, we have a sense of the existence of self that's illusory and the existence of some kind of realness to the phenomenal world, or ego of dharmas. And that basically what he's saying is Shunyata is seeing the phenomenal world in the absence of any kind of dualistic fixation. So letting go of all of that. He says the function of Shunyata is to see that dualistic fixations are not particularly appropriate or valid, that the awareness of Shunyata could act as a present memory in the sense that its presence is never lost. It is a present memory rather than a past record. If it were a past record, it would be a concept that we apply. But in fact, Shunyata is an experience. It's how things actually are. From Shunyata's point of view, everything is present. And so when we're in the mind of presence, being present, when we're awake and present, in other words, then we have the possibility of recollecting or experiencing Shunyata, not as a memory, but as an actual experience. He goes on to say that questioning whether we really know what things are, whether we really know what blue is or what green is a way of trying to cut through conceptual mind. We discover that we cannot find any permanent, fundamental, satisfying ground on which to stick our concepts. Things seem to be arbitrary, but we see that our perceptions, and by perceptions here again, he's talking about the dualistic fixations that we have in terms of a sense of self and a sense of other, are arbitrary. Because such dualistic fixations are temporary, which is what we see in meditation practice. We see thoughts, feelings, and perceptions just come and go. So what's so important and compelling in one moment, we completely forget in the next. Because such dualistic fixations are just temporary, they do not play a very important role in our understanding. And in fact, can be an obstacle because we get fixated rather than open. So that again, we're not experiencing reality in its fullest sense. The reason Shunyata is emptiness, he says, is because our perceptions of the phenomenal world have no characteristics of any substantial nature. And we might begin to experience something of what that means, that there's no characteristics of a substantial nature, just by reflecting on impermanence or interdependence, that things depend on other things in order to exist and come into being, and that there's no inherent self in any one thing. He goes on to say that these perceptions, dualistic perceptions, are arbitrary and dependent on a particular state of mind. And this is something we know but often forget. We lose our awareness and get caught up in our, whatever thoughts or feelings we have. So that, for instance, if we're really tired and haven't slept well, things will feel much more difficult and challenging than when we're rested. And if we can keep this in mind, we'll realize that things feel more challenging precisely because we're tired and not be as attached to the experience. Or another way of looking at the arbitrary nature of our experience, that things are arbitrary and dependent on a particular state of mind, is again looking at our experience in meditation. Speaking for myself, sometimes meditation seems to go very quickly. Other times time seems to go very slowly. When I'm anxious about giving a talk, meditation seems to go very fast, for instance. It seems like it's hardly a blink of the eye. So anyway, our experience is very dependent on our state of mind, and it is very arbitrary. So he asks, how does the Shunyata experience function? By seeing through such lies and falsity, the lies and falsity of ego of self, or ego of individuality, and ego of dharmas. By seeing through such lies and falsity, we begin to understand groundlessness, or the egolessness of totality. And From an ego-centered point of view, groundlessness can be unpleasant. Anything from a gnawing feeling of uncertainty or insecurity to full-on panic. But if we're able to let go, if we can actually relax with groundlessness, we might experience openness, freedom, possibilities of all kinds, and creativity, precisely because things aren't fixed or cut and dried. And also, I think in the experience of groundlessness, there's a possibility of some humor, that we look at our situation and see how we take seriously in one moment what in another moment doesn't seem serious at all. And this helps us to let go, so that groundlessness is not necessarily a difficult experience. But at the same time, groundlessness can be very challenging. In any case, back to the text, we could even say that the realization of the wakeful quality of enlightenment is empty. And if that were not true, if the realization of the wakeful quality of enlightenment wasn't empty, then or if we experience it that way, then we run the risk of fixation again, that it becomes something that we grasp at as a possession of ego. But the reality is the realization of the wakeful quality of enlightenment is empty. The definition of Buddha nature, or Tathagata Garbha, is that it is free from preconceptions. The quality of Buddha nature is that we contain enlightened wakeful qualities in us that are free from dualistic obstacles. And the function of Buddha nature is to awaken us to the actual Buddha nature itself, so that we can realize greater wakefulness or Buddhahood. And at that point, we have the possibility or the reality of experiencing reality to its fullest extent. If there were any if there were any concepts attached to Buddha nature, then it would no longer be the realization of enlightenment. He goes on to say, a sudden flash of emptiness may be temporary, particularly if you're trying to possess that experience as a great flash of insight. So in here, you could say he's giving us a bit of practice instruction, that it's important to recognize the experience, but let go of it. Because if we grasp it, then it will become temporary, or worse yet, become some kind of possession of ego. And so that the point where we actually have these flashes of emptiness or these experiences, it's important to not try to grasp onto them, to let go. But he goes on to say, but if you actually make a link with the wakeful quality of Buddha nature, the realization of emptiness could be said to be permanent, although the concept of permanence does not really arise. Buddha nature itself is self-existing. It is your own nature. So again, we don't need to manufacture or grasp after the experience. And in fact, any attempt to manufacture or grasp after the experience is an obstacle, because we're creating something artificial that gets in the way. And then again, we don't experience reality in its fullest sense. So with all of that, he begins to lay the groundwork for, as he says, the groundlessness of absolute truth. And in the next section, he asks a lot of questions about how do we know what we know, and what do we really experience. And it would be interesting to listen to a recording of the talk that this transcript was, derived from, because it seems to me that he's really asking us to really think about these questions. They're not just rhetorical devices, but he's actually wanting us to look at our experience of how do we know what we know, and to really, with our mind in the present, in other words, with bringing ourselves fully present, to actually look at what does it mean? What do we mean when we say what we say? How do we really know these things? So the next the next section is titled Freedom from Names and Concepts. And he says, you can say there is not much you can say about ultimate or absolute truth. It is freedom from fixation, and freedom from fixation means being free of names and concepts. But if you take out names and concepts, what is left? There's a shadow of the name and concept, but is it real? Is the name real, or the concept real? So again, we're asked to actually contemplate our experience of concept and language, and how do we know what we know, and what do we believe is really real? And he starts by giving the example of a person's name. As he says, you could call your son George, but is he actually George? That's just a name you decided to call him for lack of an alternative. You have to call him something in case someone asks who he is, who are you? And he says that everybody's done that for generations, but where does it come from? And he continues, George is a concept. Where did that come from? How did we do that? So I thought about that a little bit and realized that, I've been Michael for 67 years that I've been on Earth, but there wasn't some fundamental Michaelness in me that demanded I be called that when I was born. It was a decision my parents made. I could have been any name really, and yet I was named Michael, and now there's a whole case history, a whole storyline or a bunch of stories built up after the fact on top of that name. So, but I think with all these questions and that keep coming, he's asking us to look at our actual experience and not just the kunzup, all-covered conceptual surface that we usually skate on, but to actually look at what it really means with names and concepts, what our actual experience is. Anyway, he goes on to begin to apply this to all the things we name in the world, not just our own name or the names that we might call our children. But he says, we call this bread and we call that pot. The concept of bread does not have any background as such. Do we actually have a real feeling for the word bread in our mind before we've been told that something is bread, before we decided to call something bread? We call something bread, and it actually performs its function as bread fully and properly. But we never think about these things. We just think, I had bread. There's something very empty about the whole thing. It's actually hollow, full of all kinds of hoaxes, he says. And by the way, his use of the word function there is kind of interesting because in some Hinayana philosophical schools, that things have a function gives them at least a seeming reality. So that, for instance, I think last week or the week before, I talked about the mirage of water on the road and the fact that it looks like water, but when we actually get there, it's gone because it's a mirage. From a Hinayana point of view, I'd say it's not real because it doesn't have the function that water does. You can't drink it, a fish can't swim in it, you couldn't put out a fire with it. But in this case, he's actually going a little further, that even having a function isn't enough to give something reality exactly. Anyway, we believe in all kinds, he goes on to say, we believe in all kinds of fantastic words. We believe in all kinds of fantastic, we also believe in worlds too, but fantastic words, which we call our beliefs. He says, I believe in the blah, blah. I believe in this. I don't believe in that. But again, what do we really mean by these things? Do we really know the language completely? And he goes on, what is language anyway? And he keeps going. We decided to call language something deeper or an utterance that comes from above us. But what do we mean by above us or by deeper? The hollowness goes on. It goes on all the time. He goes on to say that some kind of rumor had been built up for centuries and centuries, and we decided to believe that fantastic rumor. We decided to call it reality. Then he gives an example next that actually, I think actually comes from the Yogacara teachings, but I'm not sure about that. But he gives the example of someone having jaundice, seeing the color white as yellow because of the jaundice, and then asks, what if whole generations of people see white as yellow? And goes on to say that's actually what's happened to us, though maybe not at such a gross level. He says that actually seeing white as yellow goes against relative logic. It is confused concept. But his point is that this overlay of concept and names and words all create this kunzup world, all covered, all clothed world. And with these questions, he's really trying to get us to see beyond that, to realize the groundlessness of the emptiness behind this conceptual overlay that we spread over the world. So he keeps going. How do we know that we're not doing that at the ultimate level? Just like someone with jaundice seeing white things as yellow, or whole generations of people seeing white as yellow. How do we know that we're not doing that at the ultimate level, the real level? What do we mean by red? He says. What do we mean by green or yellow? Even more so, how do we know we share the same experience? Somebody's, as he says, somebody has conveniently put these things together, and we've been programmed since childhood so that we believe certain things. But how do we know we're not colorblind? Your red could quite possibly not be my red at all. So again, we're being asked to let go or look beyond just, conventional conceptual mind here. He says our perception, our approach to reality could be entirely different than someone else's. And this is what I found, that just as an aside, I found it really interesting when I was in college to take an anthropology classes and really have a sense of what it means to live in a different culture. That as just one simple example of how one's reality in one place could be very different from reality in another. We have a culture that highly values science as a means of finding truth, or that science is a way of experiencing reality. But there are cultures where visions and dreams are actually the more true reality. For instance. Anyway, back to the text. On the whole, he says, there's some kind of a hole. On the whole, there's a hole, a leak. Something does not hold together in how we experience life. We say, I love you, or I'm your friend, but what do we really mean by that? What is behind the whole thing? Is it just some kind of facade? Not even kind of a facade, but an all-around facade. Or again, kunzup, all covered, all clothed. Things don't, and when we're stuck in this kunzup, all covered world, then we're not experiencing reality in its fullest sense. We're experiencing reality from the point of view of some kind of fixation or preconception. In any case, things don't seem to be as solid as we think, and it is not really fixable. Then he says, due to our lack of sanity, we have no idea what we're doing at this point. Maybe everybody's mad. That's possible. How do we know? So at this point, we're at a point of total groundlessness. If we really contemplate these questions, really look at our experience, come to realize how much our experience of the world is bound up in cultural, conventional, conceptual mind. And so he says, Shunyata is very real. But the question is still, how do we really know about our part of reality? Can we really trust in that if we're fixed in our perceptions? He goes on to say, when we see things, we label things. This is a jar, this is a table. We seemingly share these things together. We even come to agreements together. But still, how do we know that we're saying the same thing? And then continuing with Madhyamaka point of view, and I think like just asking these questions, getting us to really look at our experience is something of a Madhyamaka approach, to look beyond concepts. One of Nagarjuna's ideas in connection with Shunyata is the realization that there is nothing we can hang on to that is actually a common idea. Everybody, he says, everybody believes blue is blue, yellow is yellow, but really nobody really knows, because we have no way of talking with one another except in terms of our own conceptual language. And he says we could actually tune ourselves into a kind of make-believe. How much does the lingo, how much does the language we are learning make us think we share the world together, and how much are we actually sharing the world together? And he goes on to say that's what it really boils down to. We do not know who we actually are from that point of view. We have absolutely no idea. What do we mean by me or I? What do we mean by that? If we do not know what we mean by red or blue, we could also ask, what do we mean by me? So again, it's, I think most of the time we kind of skate by or skate along on the surface of things with conceptual mind, but he's actually asking us in our immediate experience, how do we know what we know? What do these concepts, what do these words, what the language, what do these labels really mean? Is there anything we can pin down? And we find when we really look that we can't. He says it's very tricky, but very simple logic. As a contemplative practice and a way to study Shunyata, you could think about all of this. So I think that's what he's been doing. He's getting us to think about these things as a contemplative practice, as a way to study Shunyata. Or, as was said in the beginning of the chapter, he wanted to build some kind of ground for experiencing the groundlessness of absolute truth. And I think if we were to really take these questions and really look at our experience in the moment, that's exactly what we'd find, that things are groundless, things are empty, that the things that we think have reality are these names, labels, and concepts that ultimately are hollow or have a leak in them, as he says. So anyway, it's very tricky, but very simple logic. As a contemplative practice and a way to study Shunyata, you could think about all of this. Do we really know who we are? What is yellow? What is red? What is up? What is down? What is water? What is fire? Well, do we? Well, he asks us. So basically then, the last paragraph kind of interesting too. He says the Shunyata principle is connected with the Nidanas. So if you remember, the Nidanas are the links of codependent origination that that as part of what we'd study in studying karma or action, and kind of describe the way in which a lot of different events come together to produce a temporary moment of consciousness, and up to an entire lifetime. This is described in the 12 Nidanas. So basically, the Nidanas are coincidences which make things seem real. He says that the Nidanas are coincidences which make things seem real and solid, and Shunyata is something that kind of deflates that. So again, what gets created by karma, by our habitual tendencies, by the momentum of our habituation, our identification with things, our projection onto things, all of that is what's described in the Nidanas. That Shunyata deflates all that. Supposedly, he says, by understanding the deflatableness of Shunyata, we begin to realize the coincidence of the Nidanas or tendril. That is to say that certain things coincide. Coincidence takes place in life. And he gives the example of that he and his students, for that matter, you and I, all of us, might misunderstand each other and what we're talking about. But still, he says, something's brought us together in a very strange way. We may have entirely different ideas about the world, but we are still connected. This is an example of the Nidana principle, which brings things together. And yet still there's emptiness. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Michael. Let's see. Here we go. So the basic problem that Shunyata is addressing is, as he said at the beginning of this chapter, it's the dualistic fixation. The dualistic fixation means belief in I, me, and other, everything else. We believe that these things exist in a very true way. And what existence means is fundamentally, it has three qualities, this existence. Perhaps the most important one, or the easiest to grasp anyhow, is that a thing exists over time. And the implication is that it exists without changing, at least for some period of time, so that it is what it is, what it is. What Buddhism says is that if you examine your experience, nothing exists over time, even for an instant. Everything is constantly changing. Your field of experience is constantly changing. What you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're sensing in your body, all these things come and go. What you taste, what you smell, those are the five senses. And then what's going through your mind? Nothing lasts for even a second in this immediate field of experience. The idea that anything can last is just that, an idea. It only exists in ideas, things that you think that this gong ringer is a gong ringer is a gong ringer, but actually it's just this experience of what you're seeing right now, and then it's gone, and then it makes a noise. It's just everything is constantly in the present moment, which is the only time we ever really have changing. So nothing has its own being in the sense of being ongoing through time. That's just an idea, a concept, a thought that things have any existence. The second thing is that things exist independently, but look at your computer screen, at the image that you're seeing. Everything is in constant relationship to everything else. Nothing exists independently. Nothing arises independently. It can't. There's no such thing. Everything is a constant part of a matrix. And the third thing is that things are unitary. But nothing is unitary. Everything is made up of parts which are constantly changing and are constantly in relationship with everything else. So this is what is meant when they say, when Shunyata says, nothing exists. Nothing has any true inherent existence. That's the term, that's the way it's usually translated. And that term, true inherent existence, is a translation of a term in Sanskrit, svabhava, or in Tibetan, rangjin. It means things have their own being. And what Buddhism says is, try and find it. All there ever is a constant and ever-changing display. Like images in a mirror, like reflections on water, like mirages in the desert. When you try and grasp it, it's already gone. And yet, we are constantly labeling things. There's John, there's my computer, there's this sound. Those labels, those concepts, give the illusion of fixity, of true existence, of svabhava, of inherent existence. Because we say, this pen endures over time. Well, that's just an idea. What we actually experience is this thing that's moving around in space and changing and deteriorating, even though we can't see it. There are two versions of impermanence. One is that things have a half-life, like this body and this pen and everything. It ultimately degrades. But even more profound is the fact that in the field of experience that you have, nothing endures even for a split second. Everything is constant fluxing. And yet concepts, there's a person, there is a screen, there is a computer, there is my piece of paper. These concepts give the illusion, or seem to connote, that things actually endure without changing, with one set of characteristics over some period of time. When we believe that, when we are caught in this world of concepts, this world of I, that I is an unchanging, solid core of me. And yes, I change, but there is this core of me. And there's that core of you that I relate to. And then we're caught in this endless problematic relationship between I and other. Because we want this I, as long as we believe in an I, we want it to exist. We want it to prosper. We want it to survive. We want it to be healthy. And when it's not these things, we worry. And so we're constantly struggling to buttress this imagined existence of I, to make it safe, solid, sound, healthy, happy. And we do it in relationship to other, which gives rise to the 3 poisons, the 5 kleshas, the 6 realms. Because if we are trying to preserve our existence, worrying about our death, worrying about our well-being, which is what I always does, then we are in constant worrying about what is the other? What is it going to do for or to me? Is it my friend, in which case I want to pull it to me? Is it my enemy, in which case I want to push it away from me? Or is it just neutral, indifferent? In which case, we stay the same distance. And those are the three poisons: hatred, passion, and aggression, and indifference. Hatred is pushing it away, passion's pulling it towards you, and indifference is staying the same distance, you don't care. So as long as we are living in this world of concept, of ideas, which concretize things, in complete sort of ignoring of the fact that the utter impermanence of our immediate experience in the present moment, which is the only thing that's ever really real, the rest of it's ideas. And as long as we ignore that, we are caught in this world of the three poisons, the five kleshas of passion, and what are they? Actually, the six realms: pride, envy, passion, hunger, in stupidity, and aggression, hatred, the way in which we relate to other. Shunyata is beginning to move into a different world, a world seen stripped of concept, a world seen arising in this present moment, fresh, every instant, and constantly changing. What's here now passes away and is replaced by something else, just like these words, just like water flowing out of a faucet. It's gone, and then, but there's new coming. This is the world of Shunyata. It's the world of reality. It's the world beyond the mistakes of concept. Concepts arise in this world of Shunyata. I mean, we're here, but they're just labels that we affix to things. It's as though you were to take this gong ringer and take a piece of paper and write gong ringer on it and then scotch tape it. Here's the reality, and there's the label. That's what words and concepts are. They are the labels that we put on reality. So Shunyata is when we begin to come into contact with and see and appreciate and live in this world freed from all the concepts and all their implications for passion, aggression, indifference, pulling it towards me, pushing it away from me, being afraid of it, being hopeful for it, being free of all that. We begin to step into a world of, as he put it at the very beginning, as Michael noted, it's a vivid world. This world stripped of the concepts, because these concepts are like filters. We see the world through the filter of good, bad, hopeful, indifferent, whatever it might be. And we don't see it as vividly as we could. So the world of Shunyata is not just empty of concept, but as he says here later on in the chapter, it's very full. It's full of all of this that is arising in the present moment, in all its extraordinary vividness, which is a beauty, and it's alive, and it's something that we could enjoy. So he talks about ultimate truth as the cosmic orphan. That's the next phrase. And the reason it's a cosmic orphan is because it's not dependent on anything else. There is no cause that produces it. It has no birth and no death. It has no independence. It's utterly free and independent, Shunyata. It's what is arising now and passing. He says that ultimate truth implies there is something behind the reality of relative truth, kunza. Then he says, it's fine to see reality as empty, but absolute truth, dundam, is not just emptiness. It is absolutely full of this, but empty of I and other, empty of dualistic fixation and everything that goes along with dualistic fixation, all those neurotic complications that go along in the relationship between I and other. It's free of that, but it's totally full of this beautiful, vivid self-arising. And we can come into this in our meditation practice. When we In our meditation practice, rest in complete awareness. We let go of thoughts of I and other. And maybe for a moment there's a gap and we experience some kind of vivid perception of some aspect of life. So he said, Tundam exists as a cosmic orphan, empty of any reference point, empty of I and other. But at the same time, it is somewhat full by itself and completely unique. It's unique every second. There's a little caveat that you can make this into a philosophy. That's in the phrase, emptiness is form. And then you cling to this. It's a constant coming into the present. It's a constant letting go of any reference point, any definition, any desire to hold something for me. That's what kills it. And so he says, when you say no, it is complete negation. Negation of any dualistic fixation of I and other, which is also a complete affirmation. Emptiness is also fullness, the fullness of this life, of this world. So really, Shunyata is a complete, utter affirmation of the beauty and the worthwhileness and the richness and the vividness of life. Vividness becomes a very important term in the teachings as we go along, especially in the levels of Tantra. And then he goes through these two types of Dundam. Dundam meaning absolute truth. And basically what he's talking about is the stages of realizing it. That in the first stage, really what we're seeing is pure relative truth. That when we see this world as being very vivid and defined, and blue is blue and red is red, and even whether we call it that or agree on that, that's another issue. But when we see the vividness of this world, we begin to get to absolute truth because we're beginning to let go of our concepts. And beyond that, then we begin to contemplate this, all these ideas. And in contemplating it, we begin to let go further. We begin to become aware of how we make mistakes. The mistakes are that we try to define things, we try to label them, we try to give them reality and concept, when the concepts are just these temporary labels that are stuck on things. And when we begin to see that difference, we begin to contemplate that, we move further into absolute reality. And then finally, we get to this what he calls uncountable Dundam, uncategorized Dundam, which is that we begin to actually experience Dundam, absolute truth, really. And in experiencing it, the relative truth becomes even more vivid. The qualities of the senses and of mind, all of it, becomes so vivid because we are moving beyond concept and seeing things as they are now, in this present moment. He says, he's talking about the Heart Sutra, and we're going to be talking about that maybe next week, I think. We'll see. And how in the Heart Sutra, when they say no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, and all of that, this is the intellectual side of it. This is the countable Dundam. This is the part where it's being analyzed and it's being intellectualized. And that's helpful. But it's really the first stage. And it begins to get us towards it. It's meditation practice, coming present again and again, vipassana, awareness practice, that brings it into what he's calling as the uncountable Dundam, the real experience of it. He says here, and then he talks, Michael's really dealt with this, he comes back to it again, that all of us seem to agree to something. We say the sky is blue, and we put that label on it, but we don't really know what that other person is experiencing. They could be seeing what we call yellow, but they call it blue because everybody's agreed the sky is blue. And we agree to tons and tons of conceptual systems that are arbitrary For instance, democracy, religion, whatever it is that we agree to, Buddhism, and we see that other people hold to the same beliefs, and so we feel that we know what they are thinking and what is in their minds and what they're agreeing to, but we don't really know. Really, the only thing that we can truly know is what we are experiencing right now in this present moment. And the words are just useful ways to take things, useful at a particular time and place for particular people. He talks about that the ego of dharmas, he's talking now about countable dundam. The ego of dharmas is hard to cut through because you still have some idea of the path and the teachings and some idea of the person who is making the journey. So really what's happening is he's talking about what the resistance is. When we begin to understand this intellectually and maybe even experientially, we begin to understand how gorgeous this is, this doctrine of Shunyata, which is of emptiness and fullness at the same time. It's about really stripping away what makes life dead and then beginning to see it as totally full and alive and vivid. And when we begin to do that, we begin to notice I'm progressing on the path. And that becomes another obstacle. That idea that I'm beginning to understand this. And that what the path really consists of at the level of the Mahayana is the constant wearing away of that practitioner, that path treader, that meditator who is accomplishing something. Because that idea of accomplishment gets in the way. It's another subtler version of ego and ego aggrandizement. So he says, the ego of dharmas is hard to cut through because you still have some idea of the path and the teachings and some idea of the person who is making the journey. You still have a sense of direction, although you experience many flashes of directionlessness. Those flashes of directionlessness, they're a complete coming present. Really what we're doing is we're letting go of any direction. And when we do that, then we become a true path treader. But as we feel that we are making progress on the path, that inhibits our progress. You still have a sense of direction, although you experience many flashes of directionlessness, but they do not last very long. They are just temporary. There is still the continuity of me making the journey. This is the definition of what it means to be at the middle level of the path. Me, I am making the journey. And there is another residue in addition. And this is really extremely profound. Until you get to the highest tantric level, or ati. Ati is another name, that's the Sanskrit name, or one of the Sanskrit names for what is in Tibetan called great perfection, in English, dzogchen in Tibetan, and it's the ultimate level of the path. And he says, until you get to the highest tantric level, dzogchen, ati, each one of your achievements is also your way of messing up. And that's because as you make this achievement, you say, oh, I've gotten somewhere. Now it's getting even better. I'm more subtle. I'm losing my ego. Who's losing their ego? So at every level of the path, it just gets subtler and subtler. The appreciation of nowhere to go, of being here. The teachings, the path, Dharma. And it's all about me. And he says, and this is an amazing image. I've never heard this one before. It's like a worm eating its way through a piece of wood and leaving excretions behind. What we're eating through is ego, but we leave behind the excretions, which are, I got rid of my ego, or I got rid of some of my ego. And there's still that I getting smaller and smaller. At the Dzogchen level, they say that all levels below it are still inferior, getting so closer and closer, but they're inferior. And the reason they're inferior is because there's an idea of further understanding, of further progress on the path, of getting somewhere, of if I do this, if I do this practice, then I will achieve greater understanding and enlightenment. And that is what is being worn away and away and away. And because what it's really saying is, wake up. This is it. There is no path. There is no achievement. This is life. This is each one of our lives. Enjoy it. Be here for it. And then we get to this fourfold definition of ultimate truth. This is really more a description of what it's like to be here. Joy. Ultimate truth is joyous or pleasurable. Because why? Because we've given up the struggle to get somewhere. And now we're actually enjoying the vividness of this world. He says, without any reference point, it is not dependent on the reference point of escape from pain or increasing pleasure. The joy of ultimate truth is not dependent on the reference point of escape from pain or increasing pleasure. It's as it is, this. And its purity. Ultimate truth is pure because the quality of Shunyata experience is beyond any kind of indulgence. It needs no feedback or further excitement. It doesn't need any kind of confirmation. Confirmation is a sign of lack of confidence. And there's total confidence in the absolute truth. Permanence. It doesn't mean longevity or eternity, this kind of permanence. The idea is that the present moment, now, is permanent. This is the only thing that's real. And it's always here, this present moment. And finally, being. It's not ego, not in the sense of a fundamental reference point. Self-existing being. When you are there, you are there. If you are not there, you are not there. There is a quality of actually being there fully and properly. You exist in your own way. This is it. We're being right now. So these are the four qualities of ultimate truth. The four definitions of Dundam. They're the basic reference points of ultimate Shunyata experience, Tathagata Garbha, which is another name for the ultimate truth. And I want to go back to one point that appeared in the section Michael took. It's that if you actually make a link with the wakeful quality of Buddha nature, the realization of emptiness could be said to be permanent. Wow, permanent. Although the concept of permanence does not really arise. Buddha nature is your own nature. It's like, I don't question that I'm a 77-year-old male. It's patently clear. In the same way, each one of you knows who and what you are, and in the same way, we wake up to the fact that our nature is Buddha nature. Enlightened mind, Shunyata, and that it's undeniable, just the way it's undeniable that you're sitting wherever you happen to be sitting right now. It's clear. He finally closes with a brief aside, which I'll just mention. There's an argument among the Tibetans about whether Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature, exists or not. And we don't have to go in there. It's a long argument, and there's basically two camps. And the Kagyus and the Nyingmas are on one side of the argument, and the Gelugpas, and I think the Sakyas, are on the other side of the argument. And it's a subtlety that we don't need to. He mentions it at the end of the chapter, and we're not going to go there. So we can have a discussion. Is this a conversation stopper? This distinction between concept on the one hand, labels, names, language, and this utterly non-existent experience on the other is really something that we're going to be dealing with all the way to the end of the path. And it's really beautiful. The relationship between words, concepts, and the immediacy of experience, which you can't hold on to. It's like a constant flow happening right now, has no true existence, a constant presentation, like images on a computer screen, like the movie you watch on your television, this life that we're living in the middle of. And you know how vivid a movie on the TV can be from time to time, especially a good one. We're always training our movies because we really love the vivid ones, the ones that rouse us. It's the same thing with life. The vividness of this life in emptiness, in Shunyata, because that emptiness is such a fullness.
John, what is the place of language in emptiness? I mean, he's pretty much debunked the idea that there's any meaning there. It's like we're making it all up as we go along.
It's conventionally useful. Pass the salt, please. You're stepping on my toe. It's useful.
Relative truth is true on relative terms, and language is tremendously useful.
But it's not real in the sense of being what it refers to. It's just like an indicator, a pointer. And it's like like you take a paintbrush and you paint something, a color, temporarily. So it's useful at a particular time and place. They say the Buddha spoke in 84,000 tongues, 84,000 languages. And what that means is that he said whatever was useful to the people that he was speaking to at a particular time and place to help them get enlightened, help them wake up for confusion. All language is like that, though. Pass the salt. Kurt.
How can we live in this state of Shunyata? I think it's the same thing as what John Tyler was saying too, is that, in this state, it feels like everyone's got to be in that state of being as well to exist with each other, or are we moving in and out of it? I'm almost referring it to like being on an acid trip and just being so much in the moment, but how do we relate with each other and communicate with each other if we're not all on board? And, so I think that's what keeps my mind second guessing. How can I live in Shunyata and permanently? And or is that possible?
Absolutely. Inevitable. Dzogchen teaching saying that all sentient beings, that's us, down to microbes, all are progressing inexorably to enlightenment. It's an undeniable and inexorable path. And then while it seems like it's taking a long time, it's actually going by in no time. You know, when a person wakes up, it's like a dream that almost never happened. Maybe it didn't. But the question is, can we live, practically speaking, in the world of Shunyata? And that depends very much on each one of us, what our karma is. So the Buddha achieved enlightenment when he was quite young. I forget how old, 31, 2, 3, but then lived to be 80. That was his karma. And it was his karma to die at that particular time. And he was living out his karma, and he taught. That was his karma too. And it was also not his karma. It was his creativity. Each one of us will be utterly different. And the values that we live by will change as we progress further into Shunyata. Definitely. Definitely. The values that we live by will completely, that will revolutionize. And there are lots of stories about all different kinds of people who went through this in different ways. And there are some basic styles of going through this. One of the interesting styles that you will come across is the Siddha style. You know, we talk about raising siddhis in one of the chants. I forget which, right? Siddhis are powers. There is a stage of progress on the path. A person has achieved enlightenment, has become enlightened. And at that point, they might become a siddha, a power holder. It's a particular stage. It's not the end of the path, because even after enlightenment, after understanding all of this, waking up, there's still further evolution and progression, all the way up into ati. Trungpa Rinpoche said the ultimate level of the path is one called old dog. That at that level of the path, you just lie around like an old dog in the dirt, with swatting the flies with your tail. So there are different stages. The Siddha stage is pretty crazy. There are all these different Siddha stories. You can have a lot of fun reading the stories of their lives. There was a book Keith Dowman translated. I think there's another translation recently called The Lives of the 84 Siddhas. And they're pretty colorful. I always like the one, I always tell this one, I'll just tell it, it just takes a second, about this guy. He was so fat that he couldn't stand up. And his family just got disgusted with him. So they had him carted out into a charnel ground and left him there. A charnel ground is when you're not wealthy enough to have your loved ones cremated. You just dump them in this ground where there are a lot of rotting corpses. And they dump their corpse there, and they're eaten by jackals and hyenas and other animals that come there to eat the dead flesh. So they dumped this fat guy who couldn't stand up in the charnel ground. Well, a charnel ground is also a place where yogis go to meditate, because there's all this death around it, and it inspires them to pursue the path. And there was this yogi there and he took pity on this guy. Maybe he fed him, I don't know, because he gave him teachings, and the guy got enlightened in the charnel ground. And he never did get up. Spent the rest of his life lying there in the charnel ground, and people came and studied with him there. He's one of the 84 siddhas. So you just can't tell what the way it's going to pan out for you. At least I don't think so. But one thing's for sure, you're going to be living the life much more intelligently, creatively, without fear, full of, what was it, joy, being, purity, and what was the fourth one?
Impermanence? Yeah.
But there's a lot of letting go, I think, in this path. Letting go of holding on to one's reference points. of security. Letting go into awareness, into reality, into open-heartedness and open-mindedness.
The other thing is we actually already live in a world of Shunyata. We just don't recognize it. It's, that's it's what reality is. The question is our belief that we need to and cling to relative truth, relative reality in order to get by. I have the same question you do at times. It's inevitable that comes up. I think that's the beginning of that sense of groundlessness that he wanted to build us into an experience of, so that we could actually see it.
But you can't jump into the charnel ground that way too early. Only when you're ready, And in the meantime, Trungpa Rinpoche said you have to exercise what he called transcendental common sense so that you can tread the path.
I think Barbara has her hand up.
Yes. I have a question to John. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So correct me if I'm wrong. John, did you once teach that something to the effect that there is no absolute truth because everything is relative truth?
Doesn't sound
Doesn't
likely.
sound likely. Okay.
Huh.
I guess I was confused. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I imagine we just go in and out of relative truth and absolute truth, depending on how present we are.
I think absolute truth fully contains relative truth. In other words, when they say that nothing has any true existence, there's the no thing that has any true existence. So there's this constant presentation, which is the relative truth, which has no true existence. No svabhava, no inherent existence. So you have to have them both. They're two parts of the same statement.
I see.
You have to have what it is that's empty of own being.
Mm.
And there isn't anything really, it's just a constant mirage.
And so absolute truth is actually using relative truth in order to communicate and make sense and live in a community.
I think absolute truth needs relative truth just for the teachings, to define the terms. But to live it, you don't even need that. It's beyond that.
Okay, that's
That's
great.
that's what they say. They say.
Do you think there really is such a thing as enlightenment? Like, do you know anyone who's enlightened?
I couldn't possibly say that. I mean, because I'm an admirer of his, I felt that Trungpa Rinpoche was. But but I can't be inside his head. I mean, so no, I can't answer that.
It's not necessarily possible to recognize it. For
I
sure.
asked him once.
Did you?
Yeah. Well, I didn't. I asked him like this. I said, I didn't ask him if he was enlightened. I didn't have the nerve. But I asked him, I said, so what's enlightenment like? It must be very pleasurable. And he said, it's more like it's the absence of something. So
Ah,
I've pondered that over the years.
like after you're able to just let everything go, that's enlightenment.
He didn't elaborate, so it's up to each one of us to come up with a meaning for that. I think
Thank
it's
you.
the absence of confusion, the absence of belief in I and other,
Fear. Hmm.
fear
Yeah.
for one's existence, hope for one's immortality.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, I guess it takes a lot of vigilance to prevent the concepts to sneak in, and the ego to, reform itself and reify itself. At least in my experience, it takes a lot of vigilance and noticing when thoughts come in and creep in, and concepts start to take hold. And of course, karma plays a part in that, and the preceding thoughts and your preceding behavior plays into that. So I guess I'm curious to hear more about the permanent link part of what you guys were talking about. The permanent link to or I don't know, being. If you could talk more about that.
The permanent link to what?
What I guess Michael had mentioned, the permanent link to Shunyata, or
It's that line. But if you actually make a link with the wakeful quality of Buddha nature, the realization of emptiness could be said to be permanent.
Yeah.
That line.
Can I say something here?
Go ahead.
Just a quick thought. It would have occurred to me, it's like learning a language. And once you know it, then you just start thinking in that language. I think it's more like that. And it takes time to develop, but it's not so much a matter of diligence or anything.
That's good.
Yeah, you could say that through the practice of meditation, we become increasingly habituated to our fundamental awareness. Because a little bit later in that paragraph, he talks about Buddha nature just having its self-existing qualities. If you go, and some of the readings we did earlier on enlightened genes and basic goodness, I think those two chapters, he really covers that. It's, they're worth reading again. And so it isn't anything we have to create. If it was something created, it could come apart like any other compounded thing. It's more recognizing our true nature and becoming stabilized in or habituated in our recognition of that. And I think that's, it's permanent, but what is it at the same time? It's ungraspable. And yet it's, clearly there's something we experience there.
I think they talk about it as a discovery of one's true nature. And just think about those words. If that's really true, the accurate description, that it is one's true nature, and that we do discover it. Well, when you discover what your true nature is, how can you ever go back? It's not possible, because you've actually discovered the truth, an undeniable truth.
So I guess, like, I've experienced states that seemed to last for a while. I guess they're jhana states or whatever. And I guess maybe that's what I'm confusing as
I think,
recognizing Shunyata.
that isn't a state.
Yeah.
It's a waking up. Like when you wake up in the morning, you're awake. You're not sleeping anymore, right?
Right.
I don't think it's an accident that they call it awakening. You know, he said in the beginning of this chapter, words to the effect, it's like, you know, if you're a Jew or an Arab, you know, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to convince yourself of it. You don't have to, you know, you just know I was born Jewish. I was born an Arab, whatever it was. I was born a Christian. I think it's like that.
Thanks for taking my question.
Thanks for asking a good question as we explore this.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's interesting that there are all these stories of Milarepa who got enlightened, suddenly, or like you were saying about Siddhartha Buddha, who got enlightened in his mid-30s, but it's not taking into account all the previous many countless rebirths and rebirths that led up to this. And it seems sudden. It's like what you said once about, I think Trungpa Rinpoche said, the gradual path to sudden enlightenment. It seems sudden. So I think it's an interesting thing that our progress is really measured in eons, right? it's but it or like what you were saying, at the time of enlightenment, where death is like our previous lives are like fleeting, like last night's dream. There's a lot that led up to it, and when we just hear the stories, it seems like it just happened. And it's I don't know what to say about it, but it's not as sudden as it appears, but I do think it is inevitable, and I've heard it put by various teachers in various ways that if you just pay attention, enlightenment is inevitable. You have no choice, really. But anyway, that's that's what I have.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks.
There's something that's been eating at me for the last year or two, which is that, it seems like it just takes forever. You go to retreats, you study, you take courses, you work and you sit for 30 minutes and it seems like 30 hours or whatever it might be, all this time. And yet, when I think about my life, it just went by in a blink. And I see George nodding yes, and I'm sure many of us, of the other gray hairs here. And I have this vast suspicion that when a person achieves enlightenment, they look back at all those eons of progress on the path, if they can remember them, and it was just a blink. And here one is right now in this present moment that seems to stretch on and on and on. In the Dzogchen teachings, they say that time is a myth. And then they call this the fourth moment. It's not even the present. Well, anybody else? A lot of very creative people here. Mark Eskenazi, don't you have something to say?
I always have something to say, whether it's relatable to anything. But I was just thinking of a wonderful, I don't know if you told the story or someone else about two people who were on the Dharma path, and one was in a rush to be enlightened, and he went to this great teacher and said, "When will I be enlightened? How many lifetimes?" And the teacher said, "Well, it would be three lifetimes." He says, "Oh, I got to wait that long." And then the friend with him, who wasn't really particularly in a rush, he said, "How long will it be before I be enlightened?" As much as the leaves on the tree. And he says, "Oh, is that all?" And he was instantly enlightened. In other words, enjoy the ride. The ride is the whole point. This is wonderful. Meditation, being in the moment. It's all good. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
That was great. Thank you. Well, shall we end? Anybody else? George, you have anything? Okay. Any more, Barry? All right, so we'll do the closing chat. How about Trip? You didn't say anything tonight. Okay, I give up. Here we go. I'll put the chant up. Dan, you're going to lead us?
We will close by dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Good
Michael.
night.
Michael.
Everyone.
Michael.
Thanks,
John. Thanks,
everyone.
Michael.
Thank you,
Good
everyone. Yeah, have a
Thanks,
good
John.
evening.
The same.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
All right.